A young black teen stood in line at the local bank, his heart pounding in his chest. This was supposed to be a simple errand, just a quick deposit for his father, nothing too complicated. Yet as he walked in and approached the counter, something felt off. The bank was busy with the usual lunchtime crowd, but the moment the teen reached the teller's station, the air seemed to change. The woman behind the counter, who appeared to be in her late 40s, glanced up at him. Her expression hardened, her smile slipping away before it could even form. She looked at him as though she had just spotted something wrong. The teen felt a sudden wave of discomfort. He was used to getting strange looks from people in certain spaces, but this was different. She had barely even said a word when she asked for his ID. He handed it over, hoping that this would be enough. But instead of simply processing the transaction, she began scrutinizing the details on his identification card. "Can you wait for a moment?" she asked, her tone colder than it needed to be. Without waiting for a response, she took the ID and stepped to the side to speak with a younger man who worked nearby. They exchanged a few quiet words too soft for the teen to hear, but loud enough for him to catch the looks they shared. He stood there awkwardly, the eyes of the people in line now focused on him. As the minutes ticked by, the unease began to build in the pit of his stomach. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, feeling the stares weighing on him. The young man, who was probably just a few years older than the teen, finally walked over to the counter. He glanced at the teen's ID as though he had never seen anything quite like it before. "Can you confirm where you live?" the young man asked in a polite but slightly dismissive way. The question was unexpected. He had given them all the information needed. Why was this happening? Sure," the teen replied, his voice a little shakier than he had hoped. He pointed out the address listed on the ID. The young man nodded but still didn't seem entirely convinced. "And how long have you had this account?" he asked, as if there was some reason to doubt the teen's credibility. The teen was starting to feel the heat rising to his face. It was clear that something wasn't right. His fingers tightened around the slip of paper with his deposit information, but the more he held onto it, the more he felt like he was just being caught up in a game he didn't want to play. He was just a teenager, trying to do a simple favor for his father, but the way he was being treated made him feel like he didn't belong in that space. "Is everything all right?" the teen asked, trying his best to keep his voice calm, though he was beginning to feel the frustration bubbling up inside. He had come here to do a simple task, and yet he felt like he was under investigation. Instead of responding, the young man looked over at the woman who had taken his ID in the first place. She had returned to the counter, watching him like a hawk, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she didn't trust him. "We just need to confirm a few things," she said, not offering any further explanation. Her words were not unkind, but they were said in a way that made it clear she thought something was wrong with him, as if there was a chance he might be up to something shady. The teen wanted to protest, to ask why he was being treated like this, but something told him it would only make things worse. He had no idea what was going on, but the situation was quickly becoming unbearable. He looked around the bank, hoping to catch the eye of someone who might offer help, or at least some understanding. But no one seemed to be paying attention. A couple of older customers were chatting quietly by the door, while a man in a suit stood impatiently at the other counter, oblivious to what was happening in the line. The teen's sense of isolation grew. He had no idea what was taking so long, but each passing minute felt like an eternity. The young man came back, this time with a slightly different tone. "Can you please step over here with me?" he said, his voice becoming a little firmer. The teen hesitated, his heart pounding faster now. What did he mean, step over? Why couldn't they just finish the transaction at the counter? He looked up at the woman, who simply nodded as if this was normal. She wasn't offering any explanation, not a single word of reassurance. Feeling both confused and increasingly uncomfortable, the teen followed the young man to a nearby corner of the bank. He had no idea why he was being singled out, but the tension in the air was thick and he didn't want to make things worse. At this point, he just wanted to finish this task and get out of there. The young man glanced back at the woman who was still watching from the counter. The teen couldn't understand why she was acting this way, and the more he thought about it, the more the feeling of being judged washed over him. The moment the teen saw his father, a wave of relief washed over him. His heart, which had been racing with anxiety just moments before, slowed down. His father had always been a rock, someone who carried an air of authority and confidence wherever he went. It was like the room shifted the moment he entered. Even though the bank was still buzzing with the usual noise, everything suddenly felt different, like the air had thickened with anticipation. His dad walked toward the counter with purpose, and the bank's atmosphere immediately changed. The tellers, who had been so quick to scrutinize the teen, suddenly looked uncertain. The young man who had been asking questions stopped in his tracks. The woman who had been so cold toward the teen seemed to falter when she saw who had just walked in. The teen's father was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, and carried himself with an easy confidence. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to raise his voice to make people listen. He just had that presence. As he approached, the woman who had been handling the teen's transaction quickly straightened up, her face turning pale. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to regain her composure, but the nervous edge in her voice was obvious. The way she looked at the teen's father was so different from the way she had looked at his son just moments before. "I believe you've been helping my son," the father said calmly, his voice steady. His eyes were locked onto hers, not with anger, but with an intensity that made the woman shift uncomfortably. "Why don't you tell me what's going on here?" The teen, standing just behind his father, felt a sudden surge of pride. It was one of those moments where he realized just how powerful his father's presence could be. This wasn't just a man who ran a successful business. This was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She glanced nervously at the young man who had been working the counter. He didn't say anything either, but his eyes flickered between the woman and the father, unsure of what to do next. "I'm asking you again," the father said, his tone polite but firm. "What seems to be the problem here?" The woman swallowed, clearly taken aback by the calm authority of the father. "It's just, well, we were having some trouble verifying the ID," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "There were some discrepancies with the address, and we were making sure everything was in order." The teen's father didn't move a muscle. His gaze never wavered from the woman. "Discrepancies?" he repeated, his voice rising just enough to make the woman flinch. "You questioned my son's ID because of discrepancies?" He looked down at his son, who was still standing behind him, unsure of whether he should say something or just stay silent. The woman's face turned red as she stammered, clearly flustered by the situation. I just wanted to make sure everything was correct," she said. But it was clear that her explanation wasn't convincing anyone, especially not the father. She could feel her own words failing her as she realized the gravity of the situation. The young man behind the counter, who had been standing by, now stepped forward. "There was just some confusion, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We weren't sure if the ID was valid. We didn't mean any offense." The father's eyes flicked toward the young man, and for a moment the teen could see that his father was holding back from saying something sharp. He could tell that his father was calculating, thinking through how to handle this without causing a scene, but also making it clear that what had just happened was unacceptable. "Let me make myself very clear," the father said, his voice carrying through the quiet bank. "My son came here to do a simple task. He didn't ask for any trouble, and yet, that's exactly what he's been given. You questioned him, you made him feel uncomfortable, and you wasted his time. All because of what?" His gaze turned to the woman. "Because he's young? Because he's black?" The question hung in the air, heavy and direct. The bank was eerily silent now, and the few people who had been minding their own business started to notice the tension building at the counter. The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood there looking at the floor, not meeting anyone's gaze. The father's voice softened slightly, but the intensity never left. "You don't get to treat people like this. Not in my presence and not in my son's." He turned slightly, looking at the young man behind the counter. "And as for you, I'm sure you were just following instructions, but I want you to understand something. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this again, you stand up for what's right. You don't just follow orders, not when it means making someone feel small for no reason." The young man nodded quickly, his face flushing with embarrassment. He had no idea how to respond to that. The entire bank was watching now, waiting for what would come next. The father took a deep breath, his eyes now resting on the woman. "I've been a customer here for years. My family has been loyal to this bank, but I'll tell you right now, if this is how you treat my son, then I'll make sure our business goes elsewhere. Is that clear?" The woman nodded quickly, her face now a shade of crimson. She could only stand there, too embarrassed and ashamed to say anything more. The young man beside her looked like he wanted to shrink into the floor. Both of them stood there, chastened as the weight of the father's words sunk in. The teen, still standing just behind his father, felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him was grateful for his father's intervention, for the calm way he had handled everything, but another part of him couldn't help but feel the sting of what had just happened. He had done nothing wrong. He had simply walked into the drive home was quiet. The teen sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed out the window as the city passed by in a blur of buildings and streetlights. His father, focused on the road ahead, didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. The air between them was filled with an unspoken understanding. The father was proud of his son, but he knew that the events at the bank had shaken him in ways that words could not easily fix. The teen wasn't sure what to say either. He had always admired his father's strength, his ability to remain calm and assertive no matter the situation. But in that moment, the teen couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, anger, frustration, even confusion. Why had it taken his father's presence for the situation to shift? Why hadn't they believed him when he showed them his ID? Why did it seem like they'd made assumptions about him based on how he looked? It didn't make sense, but it hurt. His father must have sensed his unease because, after a while, he spoke. "You know," he began, his voice steady but kind, "sometimes people will treat you in ways that don't make sense. They'll assume things about you just because of how you look, how old you are, or where you're from. But that doesn't define who you are. You can't let it." The teen nodded, though the words didn't seem to sink in as easily as they normally did. He'd heard similar lessons before, and he knew they were true. But today it felt different. It felt like the world had shifted, and he wasn't quite sure how to navigate it anymore. "I just don't understand why they treated me like that," the teen finally said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I was just doing what I was asked to do. I wasn't doing anything wrong." His father glanced over at him, his gaze softening. "You weren't. But sometimes people look at you and see something they expect, not who you really are. You're a kid doing the right thing, but to them you weren't supposed to be in that place or you didn't look like you belonged. It's unfortunate, but it's real." The teen didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure how to process what his father had said. It sounded simple, but it felt more complicated in his heart. It wasn't just about the bank. It was about how the world saw him. And that was what hurt the most. He had been taught to believe that he could do anything, go anywhere, and be anyone he wanted. But that day he had been treated like he was invisible, like he was an outsider. The car came to a stop at a red light, and for a brief moment, everything around them seemed to slow down. The teen stared at the cars in front of them, each one carrying people, each one with its own story. They all seemed so different, but they were all just moving through the same streets. His father reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can't let their ignorance weigh you down," his father continued. "People like that, they don't define you. You know who you are. You know the value of respect, of doing what's right. That's all that matters." The teen wanted to believe that. He really did. But there was a part of him that felt the weight of it all. The way he had been questioned, the way he had been looked at like he was somehow different. It wasn't just about the bank, he realized. It was about the way people treated him, even when he wasn't doing anything wrong. It was about how sometimes, no matter how hard he tried, the world still seemed to see him through a lens that wasn't his own. The light turned green, and the car started moving again. The silence between them stretched on a little longer, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet that allowed both of them to think, to process what had just happened. When they got home, the teen stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door. He felt exhausted, drained from the emotions of the day. His father followed him inside, and the house, as always, felt like a safe haven. It was a place where he could breathe, a place where he didn't have to pretend to be something he wasn't. As they entered the living room, his father gestured for him to sit down on the couch. He did so without saying anything, sinking into the cushions as if the weight of the day was finally catching up to him. His father took a seat across from him, his eyes thoughtful. "I know today was a tough day," his father said quietly, "but I want you to understand something. The way people treat you has nothing to do with your worth. It has nothing to do with what you've accomplished or how smart you are. It has everything to do with their own limitations, their own biases. And the more you stand tall in who you are, the more they'll see that. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about knowing your own worth and not letting anyone take that from you. The teen didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the words his father had said, trying to make sense of them. They sounded wise, like something he would have heard in a self-help book or a motivational video. But the reality was different. The reality was that he had just been humiliated, made to feel small in front of a group of strangers. And he wasn't sure how to get past that. "Dad," he said after a long pause, "how do I stop feeling like they're right? Like maybe I don't belong there?" His father's eyes softened and he leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "They're wrong. All of them. And you belong wherever you choose to be. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to give them that power. People will always try to put you in boxes, to label you based on what they see, but those labels don't define you." The teen nodded, though a part of him still felt conflicted. It wasn't enough to hear these words. He needed to believe them, to feel them deep inside. But it was hard. It was hard to push back against everything the world seemed to be telling him. "Do you think I can make it?" the teen asked quietly. Do you think I'll ever be able to really be myself no matter what they think of me?" The next day, the teen woke up to the soft rays of sunlight filtering through his bedroom window. The weight from yesterday's event still lingered in his chest, but today felt different. Maybe it was because he had his father's words in his mind, or maybe it was because he knew that life couldn't stop for one uncomfortable moment. Still, there was something unsettling about it all, something that made him feel like the world around him hadn't changed. Even though he got ready for the day, trying to shake off the heaviness of what had happened. As he walked into the kitchen, his father was already there, reading the newspaper with a cup of coffee in hand. His mother was busy preparing breakfast, humming a tune to herself. It was a quiet morning, the kind of routine day that always seemed to calm him, but today it didn't feel as comforting. "Morning," he said, grabbing a piece of toast from the counter. "Morning," his father replied, looking up from the newspaper. "How are you feeling?" The teen paused, considering the question. How was he feeling? It wasn't as easy to answer as it used to be. He wasn't angry anymore, at least not at the bank staff. But there was still something in the pit of his stomach. Something that made it hard to completely move past what had happened. It wasn't just about the incident anymore. It was about how he had been made to feel. "I'm okay," the teen said finally, though his voice didn't fully match the words. His father must have noticed, because he set the paper down and looked at him with a knowing gaze. "You don't have to pretend," his father said. "If you need to talk about it more, I'm here." The teen nodded, grateful for his father's understanding. But part of him didn't want to talk about it anymore. Part of him just wanted to move on. The truth was, it was hard to keep dwelling on something that made him feel so small. He didn't want to be the person who couldn't shake off something like that. His father gave him a small, reassuring smile before picking the newspaper back up. The conversation didn't go any further. His mother called them to the table for breakfast, and for a while, the world outside seemed to fade away. As the day went on, life returned to its usual pace. The teen went out with friends, hung out at the park, and tried his best to put the events of the bank behind him. But no matter what he did, he couldn't escape the feeling that it had left a mark on him. A part of him was still stuck in that moment, wondering if it would ever happen again. By evening, he was home again, sitting in his room and scrolling through his phone. His thoughts kept drifting back to what had happened, and it wasn't long before the nagging feeling returned. He hadn't really processed everything. His father had said some wise things, but deep down, the teen wasn't sure how to carry those words with him. The world had a way of making you forget, making you doubt, and that doubt made everything harder. Just then his phone buzzed. It was a text from his dad. "I'll be home a bit late tonight. Don't worry about dinner. Just heat up something from the fridge. And remember what happened yesterday. Don't let it define you. You're stronger than that." The teen smiled, his father's words sinking in a little more now. It was strange how something so simple could feel like a lifeline. Maybe he didn't have all the answers, and maybe the world wasn't going to change overnight. But his father was right about one thing. He couldn't let this moment define him. His phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. The teen opened it, expecting to see an update from school or a newsletter. But what he found instead was an unexpected message from the bank. The subject line read, "Apology and clarification regarding your recent visit." His heart skipped a beat as he opened the message. The email was from the bank's customer service department. It apologized for the inconvenience and discomfort caused during his visit the day before. It explained that there had been an internal misunderstanding about the process and that the questioning had been unintentional. The email went on to clarify that all staff members involved had been informed about the situation, and sensitivity training would be provided to ensure something like this never happened again. The teen sat back, staring at the screen. Part of him was surprised that the bank had taken the time to send an apology. Another part of him, though, didn't feel as relieved as he expected. The words in the email were kind, but they didn't change what had happened. They didn't erase the feelings of humiliation, the discomfort of being treated like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong in a place he had every right to be. He put his phone down on his desk and ran his hands through his hair. The apology didn't fix anything. It didn't make the sting go away. The problem wasn't just that the staff had made a mistake. It was that they had assumed things about him because of how he looked. And even if they apologized, that assumption was still there. It wasn't going anywhere. That's when the teen realized something important. It wasn't just about the apology. It wasn't about expecting people to fix their mistakes. It was about how he chose to respond to them. He didn't need validation from the bank. He didn't need them to make it better. He needed to stand strong on his own, to know that their mistake didn't define who he was. He had the power to move forward, to rise above it, even when people tried to be. The days after the bank incident felt like they had passed in a blur. Time moved forward and life returned to its routine. The teen went to school, hung out with friends, and spent time with his family. But deep down, things were different. He didn't talk about it much, but the events of that day kept resurfacing, like ripples in water that never fully settled. Sometimes it seemed like they were always just beneath the surface, waiting to come up again. One evening, about a week later, the teen sat in his room, working on a school project when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, recognizing the name of his father's business associate. He hesitated, then answered the call. "Hey, is everything okay?" the teen asked, a bit confused as to why his father's associate was calling him directly. "Well, I hope I'm not interrupting," the voice on the other end said, sounding friendly enough. "But your dad asked me to give you a heads up. We got some news today that I thought you should hear." The teen sat up straight, suddenly alert. "What kind of news?" "About the bank," the associate replied, his voice lowering slightly. "Apparently they've taken your complaint seriously. In fact, they're reaching out to make some big changes. The head of customer service called your dad, and they're offering to meet in person next week. They want to do more than just an apology. They're committed to making sure something like this never happens again." The teen was quiet for a moment, letting the words sink in. He hadn't expected this. He thought the email response had been the end of it. But now it seemed like the bank was taking action in a way he hadn't anticipated. His father had always taught him to stand up for what was right, and in this moment it felt like that was exactly what had happened. His voice grew a little steadier as he spoke. "Do you think they're serious about it?" the teen asked. "I mean, they're not just saying things to make it go away, are they?" "They're serious," the associate assured him. "They realize that they've made a mistake, and they're working on a long-term solution. It's not just about your experience anymore. It's about preventing this kind of thing for everyone." The teen thought about this for a moment. He wasn't sure if he completely believed it, but it felt like progress. The fact that the bank was going beyond a simple apology meant something. It wasn't just a case of cleaning their hands and moving on. It meant that his voice, his experience, had mattered. The conversation ended and the teen put his phone down, his mind racing. It was strange to think that something so small, an errand at the bank, had led to this. But in the end, it had been bigger than just him. It was about the way people were treated, the assumptions they made, and how those assumptions could affect someone's life in ways that couldn't always be fixed with a simple apology. The following days went by quickly, and the meeting with the bank loomed closer. His father seemed calm about it all, which made the teen feel a little more confident. He had been proud of his father before, but now he felt a deeper respect for the way his father was handling everything. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet determination to make sure things were set right. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, the teen's father left early in the morning, looking sharp as usual. The teen had a feeling that this was more than just a chance to get an apology. It was a chance to make a real change. That afternoon, the teen found himself thinking back to everything that had happened. It was strange how something that felt so isolating at the time was now leading to something positive. The teen had learned something important through the whole experience, that standing up for yourself, even in the smallest ways, could create ripples that went far beyond what you could see at the moment. Later that evening, when his father returned, the teen was waiting for him at the kitchen table. He wasn't sure what to expect, but his father's calm demeanor made him feel like it had all gone well. "So, how did it go?" the teen asked, his voice filled with curiosity. His father smiled, sitting down across from him. "It went well. Better than I expected, honestly." "Really?" the teen said, leaning forward. "What did they say?" "They were very apologetic, but more than that, they were open to real change," and his father replied. "They're planning to implement more comprehensive training for all staff members, focusing not just on customer service, but also on how to avoid assumptions based on age, race, or appearance. They've acknowledged that they need to do better, and they want us to be part of the conversation moving forward." The teen sat back, trying to process what his father had just said. It felt surreal. It wasn't just a simple apology. It was a real commitment to change. "That's amazing," the teen said, almost in disbelief. "I didn't think they would actually do anything about it." His father nodded. "Neither did I. But I think they realized that it wasn't just about one customer. It was about setting a standard for how everyone should be treated." The teen felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. It wasn't just that the bank had apologized or taken responsibility. It was that his voice had mattered. That one experience had sparked a con. Several weeks had passed since the meeting with the bank, and life had started to feel a little more normal again. The teen had returned to his routine, his days filled with school, friends, and family. But even though things seemed to settle down, a part of him still couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just in the world around him, but inside himself. It wasn't just the incident at the bank anymore. It was everything that had followed: his father's support, the bank's response, and the lesson he had learned about standing up for himself. The teen had always thought of himself as someone who didn't need to make a big fuss. He liked to keep things simple, to go about his life without drawing too much attention to himself. But after what had happened, he realized that sometimes doing the right thing meant speaking up, even when it wasn't easy. It wasn't just about making sure people treated him fairly. It was about creating a space where everyone could feel seen and heard. One Saturday afternoon, the teen found himself walking through the mall with his friends. They were heading to the food court when they passed by a new store that had recently opened. His friends were talking about the latest trends, but his mind was elsewhere. His thoughts kept drifting back to that afternoon with his father, when they had discussed how the bank was making changes to prevent future mistakes. It felt like everything had come full circle, but something still nagged at him. As they entered the food court, the teen couldn't help but notice a familiar face at one of the nearby tables. It was a girl he'd seen around school but never really talked to. She was sitting on, her gaze focused on her phone. There was something about her expression that made the teen pause. It was the way she seemed disconnected, like she was trying to disappear into her seat. His friends were already making their way toward a table, but the teen found himself walking toward the girl. He wasn't sure why, but something told him it was the right thing to do. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant but friendly. "Mind if I join you?" The girl looked up, a little surprised. She blinked a couple of times before offering a small smile. "Oh, sure. I don't mind." The teen sat down across from her, the conversation feeling a little awkward at first. They didn't know each other well, but there was something about her that made him feel like he wanted to help. As they exchanged a few words, the teen noticed that she seemed a bit distant, like she was keeping something to herself. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt like she wasn't completely present in the moment. "So, how's everything going?" he asked, trying to break the silence. She shrugged, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her phone. "It's fine, just busy, you know?" The teen nodded, but he could tell there was more beneath the surface. It reminded him of how he had felt after the bank incident, how things had been fine on the outside, but inside, he had been struggling. He didn't want to push her too hard, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. "I know this might sound random," he said, trying to find the right words, "but you don't have to pretend like everything's okay if it's not." She looked at him, her eyes widening just slightly. What do you mean? The teen hesitated but decided to go for it. I mean, you don't have to hide how you're feeling. I've been there, you know. Sometimes things feel off and it's okay to talk about it. For a moment, the girl didn't say anything. She just stared at him, as if processing what he had said. Then, slowly, she lowered her phone and leaned back in her seat. Thanks, she said quietly. I guess I've been going through some stuff. The teen nodded, offering a reassuring smile. I get it. It's not always easy to talk about, but sometimes it helps just to get it out, whatever it is. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. It's just been hard lately. I feel like I'm always being judged by the way I look, the way people expect me to be. It's like I can't catch a break, no matter how hard I try. The teen listened carefully, his thoughts going back to everything he had learned over the past few weeks. He knew exactly how she felt. It wasn't always about the big moments. Sometimes it was the small, everyday things that weighed the most. The way people looked at you, the assumptions they made, the way they treated you without really seeing who you were. I get it, the teen said, leaning forward slightly. It's like people see something on the outside and just assume they know you. But that's not who you really are, right? That's just what they see in the moment. The girl nodded slowly. Yeah, it's like they only see the surface and they don't bother to get to know the real me. It's exhausting. The teen could feel her frustration and he understood it completely. He remembered how he had felt the day he had walked into the bank. The way people had assumed things about him without really knowing him, without giving him a chance to show who he was. It wasn't right and it wasn't fair. You don't have to let them define you, the teen said quietly. You know who you are and that's what matters. It's hard sometimes, but you have to remember that their assumptions don't mean anything about you. She looked at him, her eyes softening just a little. I wish it were that easy, the teen smiled. I know it's not, but it's a start, right? The more you remind yourself that you're not what they think, the easier it gets. They sat there for a while just talking. The conversation wasn't deep or groundbreaking, but it felt like a small step for both of them. A way of connecting, of sharing experiences, and realizing that they weren't alone in how they felt. When it was time to leave, the girl smiled at him, this time with a little more warmth. Thanks for talking to me. I didn't expect that, but it really helped. The teen smiled back, feeling like he had done something good, even if it was just a small thing. Anytime. As he walked back to his friends, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't the same as confronting a bank or standing up for what was right in a big dramatic way. But it was still important. It was about helping someone see that they weren't alone, that they didn't have to keep hiding their true feelings. That afternoon, as the teen sat with his friends, he realized that standing up for what was right didn't always have to look the same. It didn't always have to be a big public act. Sometimes it was just about being there for someone else, showing them that they mattered and reminding them that their voice counted. In that moment, the teen felt proud, not because of some grand achievement, but because he had taken what he had learned from his own experiences and used it to help someone else. And that was something that really mattered. Conversation about how people should be treated, about how assumptions could be harmful. Later that night, as the teen sat alone in his room, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come in just a few short days. He'd gone from feeling small and powerless to being part of something bigger than himself. And it made him realize that sometimes, standing up for what's right doesn't always feel like a big victory at first. But over time, it could lead to real change. It could make a difference in ways you might not even see right away. The teen lay down on his bed, staring up at the ceiling. The world hadn't changed entirely, and there would still be moments when people would judge him based on how he looked or the assumptions they had. But now he knew he had the power to face those moments head on. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need to explain himself to anyone. What mattered was that he stayed true to who he was and kept pushing for the change he wanted to see in the world. And in that moment, he knew that the world might not always be fair, but he could still make it better, one small step at a time. Ring him down. The teen stood up and paced around his room for a moment, thinking. He grabbed his phone again, this time typing a quick response to the email. Thank you for the apology. I appreciate the acknowledgement. However, I hope the bank will take further steps to ensure that no one else experiences this kind of treatment. I know we all make mistakes, but I want to make sure that these things don't happen again, for anyone. He stared at the message for a moment before pressing send. He didn't know if it would make a difference, but it felt right to say something. It felt like a way to regain control, to take ownership of the situation instead of letting it control him. Later that evening, as he sat down for dinner with his family, his father caught his eye. The teen smiled, feeling a little more at ease. The weight from earlier in the day had lifted just a bit. He didn't have all the answers, but he was starting to understand that it wasn't about getting everything perfect. It was about moving forward, about not letting the world's assumptions hold him back. "You okay?" his father asked, looking at him over the dinner table. "Yeah," the teen replied, his voice steady. "I think I'm starting to get it." His father smiled, and for the first time since the incident, the teen felt like he could truly move on. There would be challenges ahead, and there would be moments where people tried to put him in boxes he didn't fit. But he knew now that those challenges didn't define him. He would stand tall no matter what. As he finished his meal, he realized that while the world outside might not always change, he had the power to shape how he responded to it. And that in itself was enough. His father smiled, a small, reassuring smile. "You're already doing it. Every day you're growing, learning, and proving to the world that you're not going to let them define you. It won't be easy, but I know you can do it." The teen looked at his father, seeing the strength in his eyes, the calm assurance that had always been there. He wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that he could rise above the doubts and the assumptions that others placed on him. But it wasn't going to be easy. There would be other moments like today, other times when he would be questioned, looked at with suspicion, and made to feel like he didn't belong. But maybe, just maybe, his father was right. Maybe it wasn't about what others saw. It was about what he believed. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the bank. But he also couldn't stop thinking about his father's words. Maybe the road ahead would be hard, but it didn't matter. He would keep moving forward. He would keep standing tall because he knew who he was. And that was enough. Bank to run an errand, but somehow, he had been made to feel like he didn't belong there. His father turned to him then, as if sensing the thoughts running through his mind. "It's not your fault," he said, his voice gentle now. "You did nothing wrong. Don't ever forget that." The teen nodded, but the lump in his throat made it hard to respond. He was glad his father was there, but it hurt to know that this kind of thing could happen so easily, that in the blink of an eye, a simple task could turn into something much more complicated, simply because of the way people saw him. The father turned back to the bank staff. "You'll be hearing from me," he said, his tone final. "I want a full explanation. And if this ever happens again, there will be consequences." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out of the bank, his son following closely behind. As they reached the door, the teen glanced over his shoulder one last time. He saw the bank staff still standing there, looking awkward and uncertain. But it didn't matter anymore. The damage had already been done. Outside, the sun was still shining, but the teen couldn't shake the heaviness in his chest. His father placed a hand on his shoulder as they walked toward the car, and though the teen appreciated the comfort, he couldn't stop thinking about how the situation had made him feel. The world outside the bank felt so different now, like he was seeing it through a new lens. He was being treated like he was a criminal, like he didn't belong in that space, and it was so deeply unfair. All he had done was walk into a bank to do something his father had asked him to do. The young man pulled out a small notepad and began asking more questions. His questions felt repetitive and unnecessary, but he continued. Where did he go to school? What kind of activities did he participate in? What was the name of his father's business? The teen answered each question as politely as he could, but the more he responded, the more the whole situation seemed ridiculous. He was just trying to do a simple task. Eventually, the young man stood up and walked away without a word. The teen was left standing in the corner, unsure of what was going on and unsure of what to do next. Every second felt longer than the last. As he stood there, helpless and confused, the door to the bank swung open. A man stepped in, tall and with a confident air about him. The man's presence seemed to bring a shift in the room. His eyes scanned the bank, and then they landed on the teen. The teen recognized him immediately. It was his father, the man who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family, the man who had taught him to be strong, to face challenges head-on, and to never let anyone make him feel small. Seeing his father walk into the bank was a relief, but it also signaled the beginning of something far bigger than the teen could have imagined.